The villain of Shrek 2 is the architect of the fantasy narrative itself. This remarkable sentence by Jacob Clemmer is a fantastic conclusion to add in my argument for postmodernism in Shrek 2. Not only does it provide context to the film by stating how it is set up in a fantasy world and provides insight into the villain's goals, but more importantly, it is a subversion of the common narrative set up in fantasy stories, as well as a critique of Disney media, which DreamWorks sets out to do. The Shrek franchise, in terms of postmodern media, stands out as an incredibly unique series of animated features, with several pop culture references, parodies, intertextuality and more. And in this video, I'll be explaining how far Shrek 2 lends itself into postmodernism.
Fiona!
Mom!
Postmodernism can be argued to be an artistic movement that began around the 1950s as a response to modernism. Jean Francis Lyotard wrote in his book The Postmodern Condition that postmodernism is incredulity toward meta-narrative, indicating his belief that postmodern media reject stories with overarching narratives in favour of smaller, fragmented storytelling. This adds to the general consensus that postmodernism is a decline of truth, as stated by Joshua Landy in his 2019 article, with pieces of postmodern media including elements such as intertextuality and self-reflexivity, which would be found in modernist media. We can base our argument upon this to discover how Shrek 2 is possibly the most postmodern animated movie of all time.
Cross the room to her sleeping silhouette, pull back the gossamer curtains to find her.
Using Lyotard's argument, we begin to see Shrek 2's postmodernity immediately emerge in the opening scene.
Not only do the audience already know who Prince Charming is and sees a stereotype based off of Disney's already established Prince Charming, but he also denies this truth throughout the film, wanting to be king instead of chasing the happily ever after.
He will rue the very day he stole my kingdom from me!
Furthermore, having the Shrek franchise set in a fairy tale world further advocates Lyotard's argument. We see not only in Shrek 2, but in the entire series, several other fairy tale characters that have journeyed through their own narrative, such as Cinderella, Puss in Boots, and even Fiona's parents, who turn out to belong to the Princess and the Frog story. Whilst it does lend itself to postmodernism, Lyotard's argument is somewhat limited here, as Shrek and Fiona's narrative is more centralised than the others mentioned, creating a more standard meta-narrative in terms of storytelling that feeds off of pre-existing ones. Frederick Jameson lays out in his book, Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, that postmodernism is a cultural response to modern world capitalism. This opposes Lyotard, as it implies how fragmented narratives are a sign that we've become lost in a world of globalisation and mass communication, which we try to fill through consumerism. This becomes problematic, as postmodernism ideally meant to be an exhilarating, liberating phenomenon, as stated by Lyotard. Corroborating this with Nasrullah Mambrel's statement, postmodernism can be associated with the onslaught of consumer capitalism, we discover an extremely postmodern take on capitalism within the world of Shrek 2. Upon entering Far, Far Away, Shrek and we the audience are greeted with a bombardment of postmodern elements that critique not only capitalism, but the face value society that we live in today. We see medieval takes on modern day businesses, such as Starbucks Coffee, Burger Prince, Versace, and even the antagonist, the fairy godmother, plays a crucial role in how postmodernism is a response to capitalism, as her business of selling happily ever afters has dominated the city of Far, Far Away, which is itself a direct parody of Los Angeles. As we mentioned earlier, the fairy godmother is the architect of the fantasy narrative itself, which adds to how she ties into postmodernism, since she not only represents a consumeristic need to buy happiness, she also represents that the happily ever after she offers is something everyone must have, poking fun at Disney along the way.
I must hold on before I too go totally mad.
Shrek? Donkey?
Too late.
Jameson also argues that originality and authenticity aren't possible when considering postmodernism, implying how everything is recycled and reused. This feeds into postmodernism's pastiche over parody and intertextuality aspects, which can be seen in Shrek 2 in the form of Puss in Boots. Not only does he parody Zorro from The Mask of Zorro, but he is also played by the same actor, Antonio Banderas, who stated in an interview for The Spokesman, the possibility of laughing at yourself is very healthy nowadays, implying how Puss allows audiences to laugh at Zorro. When coupled with Julia Kristeva's argument that media is part of a mosaic of the texts, meaning nothing is new, this further elaborates on Jameson's argument. Not only does Puss parody Zorro, an already existing character, but the intertextuality of Banderas playing both characters provides further evidence that nothing is new, let alone the fact that Puss in Boots is a character from 1500s fairy tales. Our prior discussion about known fairy tales living in the Shrek world further elaborates on this. Since DreamWorks have established the stories existing, it further lends itself to Kristeva's argument, and allows for the audience to utilise their preconceived notions about fairy tales to establish a fully fledged universe that the characters live in. However, DreamWorks takes advantage of the audience's ideas of fairy tale standards and uses it to decline truth, as previously mentioned by Landy. Using classic fairy tale stereotypes, we see how DreamWorks subverts this in their Shrek franchise. Shrek is our protagonist even though he's an ogre, the fairy godmother is a cunning villain instead of a divine wish-fulfilling aid, Prince Charming is a spoilt, whiny failure instead of a brave romantic, and as Clever further states, the first film ends with an acceptance of ugliness, this film ends with a complete rejection of beauty, mocking the you must be beautiful to be happy trope that Disney falls into. To conclude, we can see that in spite of Disney, DreamWorks' creation of Shrek 2 proves to be their postmodern magnum opus. Using arguments by Leotard and Jameson, we can understand how Shrek 2 builds upon its predecessor to further satirise Disney and critique capitalism with its postmodernity. Elements such as the setting being a parody of Los Angeles full of marketing of the fairy tale cliches summarises how DreamWorks aimed to satirise Disney and create an anti-consumerism message for the film, as well as the fairy godmother objecting to Shrek and Fiona's happily ever after, since it's not what she perceives as a typical happily ever after, aka a Disney classical ending. By analysing the sequel, we begin to see how DreamWorks utilised the pre-existing fairy tales from the 1500s, such as Puss in Boots, to not only subvert audience expectations and parody them, but also utilise them in a way that mocks and critiques the modern society we live in today. And whilst there are elements of the film that could disprove its postmodernity, such as an overarching narrative, typical structure, as well as having a significant message, it is undeniable that the Shrek franchise is postmodern, even if the latter entries fall short in that regard. Examples such as the parody of cops being on a TV, even though the setting is medieval, point indefinitely towards it being postmodern. And to even further confirm my argument, the main characters even reference they belong in a film in the DVD menu, invoking self-reflexivity, blurring the lines of reality, intertextuality, and to top it off, being a pastiche of parody.
How about this? Shrek 2, dude, where's my donkey? Oh, there he is, cut from the movie because he talks too much!
Perhaps there is an argument to be made for the film to be post-postmodern, a new trend that oscillates between modernism and postmodernism, with Timotheus Vermeulen stating, "Grand narratives are as necessary as they are problematic. Hope is not something simply to distrust, love not necessarily something to be ridiculed," potentially allowing Shrek 2 and DreamWorks as a whole to be seen as post-postmodern, as the film and the studio make great strides in creating profound meaning in all of their media.